get here. Find ourselves in this situation.
Okay. When you speak around fuel subsidy, if you look at it historically, you'll be looking at the 70s, when there was the challenge around inflation. There was inflation all over the world. And I think it was during Ambassador's time, around 1976, 77, there about 78. There was what was known as, so prices of commodities were increasing internationally and in Nigeria. So government passed a decree. The military government passed a decree known as the Price Control Decree, so that they could regulate the prices of items so that Nigerians will not suffer with the inflation. So, and one of the commodities referred to at that time was petroleum products. So since that time, and even now, when the Price Control Decree was repealed, it was replaced by the Price Control Act, which still does exist, interestingly. So historically, we started that way. And part of the reasoning beyond that time in the 70s was that a lot of people have said, oh, the only way the poor is enjoying our oil resource is through subsidy. That government doesn't provide enough infrastructure, doesn't provide enough social welfare. So let them enjoy lower oil prices. That at least that will be their own dividend of governance or dividend of democracy, democratic setting. So that's the genesis of subsidy. And basically, I mean, we all know what subsidy means. You produce something for a particular amount. You are told to sell it less than your cost of production, meaning that it's less than your cost of production and there's no profit. But someone pays that difference. So you bring in petroleum product from wherever, in Europe, in the US, wherever. Say your landing cost is 300 naira. When you convert it to naira, government says, oh, you guys who are bringing it, sell it to my people for 200. Someone has to pay that 120 difference plus the profit. That's what the subsidy is. So if you times that difference times the millions of liters of oil used every day, you understand the enormity of what subsidy is. Thank you. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Yodel. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I said, over the years, the government has raised several arguments why it should remove the subsidy. The government had several times said that the subsidy regime was not sustainable. Now, in your opinion, why do you think that the government has struggled to remove the subsidy over the years, despite the evidence that it is not working for people, it is not working for our economy?
Okay. So I always say that the subsidy conversation in Nigeria is both economic, fiscal, and political. Now, more often than not, the discussion around subsidy start from being economic or fiscal. Government says we can't afford this, doesn't make sense. There's even corruption because there are times people do not even bring in that volume of petroleum products. They connive with people at the port to say that they brought in certain volumes and they then get paid for those volumes. Now, that's the corruption bit of it. Now, the economic and fiscal is that doesn't make sense. Imagine, for example, if you look at our education budget in 2021 and the one for 2022, if you say that subsidy is over 4 trillion, it's going to be over 4 trillion this year, then it's more than double thereabout our education budget of, I think it's 2.2 trillion, if up to that. You understand? It's more than our budget for health, particularly if you also look at last year's. It was more than double. You know, it was more than the combination of what we did for primary health and education. So it's a serious matter. So government had always wanted to do it. However, to be honest, Labour always does have a good argument. We're not saying don't remove subsidy, but let our refineries work. Let us be able to refine crude in our own country. Then you would have taken away a lot of the cost. Shipping, haulage, insurance, agency fees. Now imagine that you can even have refiners who get the crude in naira. It's going to help us. And the issues around the fluctuation in foreign currency would also not impact it. So Labour always pushes back and gives good argument. But because government knows that government has not done what it ought to do, and I'm not referring to this particular government, over time, they haven't ensured that the refineries work. When the refineries were sold, it was reversed, and I think that was a major issue. I don't think the Yar'Adua administration should have reversed that sale. They do, I understand they have their reasons that they thought it was done corruptly. But the guys that it was sold to were the best guys at that time. Otedola, Dangote, they are guys who would run any business successfully. So once they reversed it, the refineries haven't worked. And refining is based on efficiency. If you cannot operate efficiently, then you wouldn't even make profit. And you'd have to be technically sound. You have to have the right people. So because government has not fulfilled its own part, when Labour pushes back, they know that really we've not done our own bit, and it will be unfair to remove subsidy. Our own bit will be to ensure that refineries work. We can refine locally. And then you don't even have a conversation around subsidy. Let people sell at whatever they want to sell. One. Secondly, it's a political conversation, because the government realizes that, like I think this current administration indeed wanted to remove subsidy, but when they looked at it and said, oh, elections are next year, we will lose face, we will lose some electoral value, we will lose some of the electorates. So I'm sure someone must have spoken to the presidency, whether in the ruling party, and told him that, you know what, except you want us to lose the next election, you cannot remove subsidy now. They may as well remove it in the first year of the new administration or by second year. So it's a combination of issues around corruption, fiscal and economic, and then political conversations. So that's what it is. It's hydra-headed. That's why it's a difficult thing to change, to remove. They would say it, but when those arguments come up, they find out that Labour does have a strong argument. And also, if you look at the current economic climate, and it's not only Nigeria, there's inflation everywhere. If you look at London, if you look at New York, if you look at Calgary, if you look at Paris, there's inflation everywhere. So that's the reason why government has not been able to. Those reasons are those reasons I've stated why government has not successfully stopped or removed the subsidy.
All right, so thank you for that. Now, you did mention that a fundamental requirement for, because before we talk about the subsidy removal debate, is that the refineries have to work. And then at the heart of getting the refineries work is both the Nigerian government and then the NNPC. Now, the governors, the state governors and the Nigerian Labour Congress have expressed doubts about the sincerity of the NNPC, the fuel consumption figures they give us, and the fact that the NNPC said it bids up to 3 trillion naira to sustain the fuel subsidy regime. Now, in your view, sir, to what extent can we even trust the NNPC? To what extent can we bank on their estimates? And to what extent can we believe that the NNPC is actually giving us the true situation of things? Vis-a-vis the claims by the Nigerian Governors Forum and even the Nigerian Labour Congress.
Okay, I'll look at this from two perspectives. From the perspective as to seriousness in revamping the refineries, they are indeed serious. And I can tell you that I'm one of the lawyers advising on the revamp of the refineries. And I see genuineness, I see doggedness to achieve that. To be honest, I can tell you that certainly that I'm one of those lawyers advising at the moment around the refineries. And there is seriousness, there's honesty, there's integrity around the process. Now, with respect to the volumes, I cannot speak much to the volumes used because that's the problem with getting statistics in Nigeria. Depending on who you speak to, the volume or liters of petroleum products used in Nigeria every day. If you check NNPC's website or data, you see something else. If you check Naira Matrix, you see something else. So it's a bit of a difficult one. And around its sincerity, I can't speak much to that. But in terms of whether they are serious about getting the refineries to work, this time around, I'm absolutely certain that there's seriousness, there's honesty around it. The process appears to have a lot of integrity around it also. That I can confirm because I have first-hand knowledge this time around.
All right. Thank you, sir. Now, taking it further, you and I agree that the average Nigerian does not understand the statistics around what the NNPC says or what all the statistics found out by the government and all of that. What we do know is that there are usually ripple effects when the government decides to tamper with the price of oil and all of that. So, what are the, in your honest view, sir, what are the possible implications? Should the government go ahead? Maybe now they have said that in 18 months' time they will still reconsider it. Should the government go ahead with the removal of the oil subsidy without putting all the necessary measures in place? What are the effects that we can, that this can bring to the Nigerian economy in fact, sir?
Okay, now from an economic point of view, it's a smart decision. In fact, my view is that it's economic or fiscal rascality to keep subsidy in the mid to the long term. It'll be fiscal rascality, actually. So I think it will do our economy some good. However, the economy is not in a vacuum. It impacts the lives of the people. So if government doesn't ensure the refineries work, support the Dangote refinery, particularly with incentives and all of those, then it will be a fair decision. Because, and even the power sector, because almost every Nigerian relies a lot on petroleum products, what we refer colloquially to as fuel, gasoline now, or premium motor spirit. A lot of Nigerians rely on it because I'm sure up to 80% of the generators in Nigeria, 90% maybe, rely on gasoline, not diesel. It's the bigger generators for the very rich, maybe upper middle class and up, that use those that use diesel, which in itself had been deregulated. So petrol or gasoline is more common. So it would lead to a lot of chaos, particularly in the micro, small scale and medium industry, micro, small and medium scale enterprises and the informal sector. And I'm sure you have that experience. You see a barber start doing business. After a while, he closes shop. And you ask him why. He says he's spending almost all his income to buy fuel for a small generator, what they refer to as I pass my neighbor. So it's going to lead to chaos in the small and medium scale enterprises, micro, small and medium scale enterprises. The informal sector is going to suffer. You understand? Because yes, ultimately it will go back to the people because prices will go up. Prices of goods and services, transportation, all of that is going to create more hardship because it doesn't mean employers will earn more, doesn't mean that employers can charge more, and doesn't mean employers will increase salaries correspondingly. You understand? For example, the Naira has dropped by maybe 50% in the last few years, but I'm not sure that employers have increased salaries or all employers have increased salaries by 50%. So it's usually not corresponding. So it leaves the average Nigerian worse off. Now, so if government doesn't do all of those, improve the power sector, everyone then needs to buy generators and use fuel. To the refineries, it means all the vagaries of international market prices, international haulage, transportation, insurance would apply. Imagine that even the Dangote refinery gets its crude in USD, but it doesn't have to do haulage. That fee is off. No insurance, that fee is off. No agency, that fee is off. That already reduces the price without even dealing with the currency issue. Now imagine that government now goes a step forward to also work around the currency issue. And maybe they get Dangote gets the quantity to be used in Nigeria, because I understand that if you produce more than what we did in Nigeria, they'll be able to export. Imagine that those refineries, the 4 NNPC refineries and the Dangote refineries, get their crude in Naira and can refine in Naira largely. There will be dollar elements because of O&M and all of that. You find out that it will automatically crash prices, and the subsidy debate will almost die. So government doesn't need to take those steps, those bold steps. And one of the bold steps government is taking is getting 20% equity, if I'm not mistaken, in the NNPC refinery and maybe certain other refineries. So it means that their equity bit, they can play around it and see how it can be used for the common man. Those are my views.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that submission. Now, I take you back to the NNPC, sir. I mentioned the sincerity of the NNPC the other time because, yes, Nigerians believe, and there is some evidence that there is deep-seated corruption in the NNPC and its leadership. In fact, one of the past GMDs of the corporation is standing trial for corruption. Now, we thought that the Muhammad Buhari government will be able to stem the tide of corruption in the petroleum and oil and gas sector in general. But that does not seem to have manifested. Now, there have been allegations that NNPC's oil subsidy regime itself is stranded in mystery, that Nigerians can't even put sincerity behind the doors being turned out, and that the NNPC and its leadership are complicit in why the subsidy regime may not work. So, sir, your honest view, do you see a nexus between the corruption in the NNPC and the success or otherwise of the first subsidy removal? Don't you think that we have to first tackle the corruption in the NNPC before we can rest assured that any subsidy removal will have optimal effects?
Very good question. Now, I am an avid reader. The book I just finished reading, The Paradox of Prosperity, you'd find out that we overemphasize corruption. I think what we should emphasize is excellent leadership, creative leadership. Because I'll take you back to the time of Nightel. There's a lot of corruption. If you remember, to get a phone line, you'd have to bribe, you'd have to do all sorts. Even when you get the line, maintenance, you'd have to pay someone, you'd have to bribe. But once there was competition, Nightel doesn't even exist anymore. Even when they existed for a short while, nobody bought their lines, if you remember. So I think the problem in Nigeria is that we emphasize corruption. What we should emphasize is creative governance, alternatives. Imagine that there are several refineries. The Dangote refinery, Boa does his own refinery. All those refineries have been privatized. Would we be talking about corruption around subsidy? No. But as long as you have the state governed, you have a behemoth, you have one person regulate and control everything. You don't democratize, that's the word. You don't democratize goods and services. You will continue to have issues around corruption. So for me, it's about being creative, about having creative leadership. It's about opening up and democratizing things than complaining about corruption. Now, that said, that's generally. Now, that said, I think that historically the NNPC has been corrupt. You see it from the past leadership. But I think recently, the leadership has changed and things have improved. I wouldn't say there isn't corruption at all, because everywhere in the world, any public institution, there's almost always corruption. But I think that they've stemmed the tide to a huge extent. And I say this from first-hand information, like I say. And in many cases, not that I'm even advising the NNPC, I'm advising the counterparties, maybe the lenders, the contractors. But I see a lot of sincerity, I see a lot of expertise, I see a lot of people who really want the country to move forward. So whilst I wouldn't say the government has won the corruption war, I think that's not quite what it used to be in terms of leadership in the NNPC. I don't think things have improved. And also, like I said, it's more important to create avenues for corruption not to thrive than to continue to hammer on corruption. I think hammering on corruption is getting outdated as far as I'm concerned. And I'll give you another example, not directly related. Imagine what we have in the Ministry of Lands in different states, where before you can get your C of O, you'd have to bribe people, you'd have to do all sorts of unwholesome things. Imagine that you don't know, there's no interface between the private citizens and the public officers. You use a middle company like one of the top consultancy firms, international consulting firms. You apply online through their system. Someone tracks it. Someone verifies that your documents are right. They instruct the public servant to print the document and send it to that big four company, and that big four company sends it to you. Where are you going to bribe? There's no avenue, there's no opportunity. So for me, when we talk about issues around corruption, remove the avenue, the opportunity for that to happen, rather than continuing to. We've been hammering on corruption for several decades. I'm not, there's been some changes, but it's not exactly that there's so much of a change. So I think it's about creating or democratizing those services or those goods, rather than complaining so much about democracy. And I then think the leadership of the NNPC has improved such that issues around corruption have reduced, in my own view.
Okay, all right, Mr. Ayodele, thank you for that. Now, let's discuss this from another perspective. Now, we know that our country is grappling with rising both foreign and domestic debt profile. Now, the NNPC, as you said, should rather democratize. Now, the leadership is changing. We should be more optimistic. But the NNPC requested more than 3 trillion, which is 24% of the total 2022 national budget, to deal with this fuel subsidy issue. Now, don't you think that when they get such money, it adds more or less to our already economy? You know, don't you think? I want to talk about the implications of releasing more money to the NNPC to be able to finance subsidy regime, and the fact that this automatically adds to our rising debt profile.
I agree with you, actually. It's a big problem for me when your debt profile, particularly when you look at it versus your revenue. Different people look at it from different points of view. Some look at it versus your GDP. Some look at it versus your revenue. For me, it's more your revenue. If your borrowing is nearly as much as your revenue, then you have a major problem. You shouldn't have any there should be a big gulf between your revenue, which would be substantially more than your borrowings. So I see it as a challenge, and I agree with you. But I think very recently, many of these borrowings go to infrastructural development. Whilst I'm not standing in for the government, but you see some of the infrastructure. I'm not saying there isn't corruption, but I think that it's not exactly what it used to be. One, I also think that much more is being done around debt. It's being used for infrastructure, to buy equipment, to upgrade facilities that have been left to rot away. So we have a challenge with borrowings, and I agree completely. But you see that more often than not, if you use it for capital projects, particularly those that can improve the lot of the people, it might not be exactly as bad as we feel it is. Those are my own thoughts. You're muted,
right,
sir.
Yes. Yes, I hope you can hear me now, sir. Thank you for your time so far, sir. Let's look at this aspect also. The chairman of Nigerian Governors Forum, Governor Kayode Fayemi, recently said that only 8 states benefit from the oil subsidy regime. And this comes back to what I said earlier about claims flying around, either from the government, from the NNPC, from the other people that are in that sector. And now Nigerians don't even know what to do. Now, I want to put it straight forward to you, sir. What is your expert advice at this point that we are? Yes, beyond the commercialization, the seriousness that you think is in the NNPC. Now, what is the way forward at this moment? Because now government seems to have acceded to the request of Nigerians that, yes, don't remove the fuel subsidy. Now, is that sustainable? Is that in our best interest? Or would you rather say, okay, government remove it, but with some precautions? So what is your expert advice on the way forward in this fuel subsidy removal issue?
Okay. I can't give advice in a vacuum and without context. We'll have to situate that advice within the Nigerian context and the current state of events. There's rising inflation. Food prices have gone up. In many cases, you find that things have doubled the price and all of that. Nigerians are not necessarily earning more. No employer is going to double your salary just out of the blue. So I think that, and we've suffered a few negative growth in a few years. I think the challenge is not about removing subsidy. I think everybody agrees it has to be removed. However, government has to do a few things, like I've mentioned before, around ensuring that electricity works, alternative transportation means, ensure that the refineries also work. That government does need to do that first. Secondly, government then needs to ensure that some of the funds that were previously used for subsidy are used for social programs, not programs that people would doubt sincerity. Like I have a challenge with people going to the market, the vice president going to the market to distribute money. I think that's outdated. I think that smacks of, I'm not sure. I also want to be, I don't want to sound rude, but I'd rather not do that. I'd rather have a system where that creates an opportunity or opportunities for people to create more wealth. If more people create wealth, it usually will go around. You'll employ people. You'll have 2 drivers. You do certain things. Yes, the poorest of the poor can't get cash sums like you have elsewhere in the world, but it should be directly paid into the account with a tracking mechanism. And it shouldn't even be done by government. They should have a private, an internationally recognized private institution administer that process. It will be tidier, it will be neater than having government market, having the vice president or someone in government go to market share. I think that doesn't make a lot of sense. That said, so in summary, I don't think this is the time to remove subsidy, considering the state of the economy, considering the state of the world economy, considering that so much still needs to be done before that is done properly, before subsidy is removed. But my view is also that subsidy has to be removed, but it's just that it's not now. Maybe in 2-3 years when the refineries are up working, when the Dangote refinery is up, where we have 1 or 2 other refineries. Now I'm not talking about modular refineries, because I said to people that people miss the point when they think modular refineries will solve the problem around gasoline. Because modular refineries, from a cost-benefit point of view, and cost recovery point of view, is not economically sensible or viable to have hydro skimming equipment. So most modular refineries cannot produce gasoline. You understand, which is petrol, which is the bone of contention, because kerosene has been deregulated, diesel has been, the pricing has been for both. So I think that we should have, as we have more, bigger refineries, as government ensures that these refineries always work, then you can remove subsidy. You wouldn't even have that conversation. Yeah, so I think that's it. I think it's something which time hasn't come, but must be done in the mid to long term. In fact, in the medium term, not even long term, or else it's not going to be sustainable. It's 1.3 trillion today. At some point, it was 10 billion. So you can imagine the rate at which in 4 or 5 years' time, we don't know what it will be. Maybe it will be our national budget. So I think it should go, but maybe not this year, maybe not next. So government needs to be pushed also to do what it ought to do.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Yodili, for your time so far. Yeah, I think that's it. So I'll step back now and allow the use. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.